myself. So hello everyone, I'm going to share my screen with you. And my intention is to see, the reason why I did this little PowerPoint presentation is because then later people can actually access the resources and hopefully, you know, it might make your work a bit easier, faster. I would say that my mindset for whatever I do is very pragmatic. And I think the key to all the work that multicultural librarians do is resilience. You keep going and going forever. Okay, sharing my screen. Here it is. Share from the beginning. Okay. Can you see my screen? It's all good or not?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
all good, thank you.
Okay. With teaching, sharing, and learning and investment integrated good, what I really try to say is that whatever we do, it requires an effort, commitment. We need to plan, we need time, we need space, budget, goals, and we need to have a very clear idea what do we want to achieve. And when we are learning, I think we need an open mind and thinking about possibilities. So everything that we do is an investment, and we want always a positive outcome. So basically we need to be ready. And the first thing that I would say, you must know your community. I said before, I have a very pragmatic mind. I don't think you get to know your community if you are sitting in your library behind your desk forever. You need to actually get out, and that should be part of your job description, because you need to establish relationship that they last a really long time. So normally, in order to get our community, the basic step that we normally use is to use the census data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. However, the problem is the data gets dated very soon. And the reason is because communities tend to move. So where the data that you really need, the most current one comes, in my experience, it comes from local governments and the networking that you build. So from your network, we'll say, the organization that they teach English, because they will know that the people have arrived in the last couple of months from health, because they do need current data, who is where and what are the issues, and education. But in order to obtain that data, you need to have a network. You need to be part of the network. In New South Wales, we created a document, which is the benchmark. And the benchmark allows us to have an overview of what we're doing and identify what are our weakest points and how we're going to improve that. It's actually not time consuming, but considering that our community tend to move, that document and the activities that you do in your library should be reviewed at least every 2 years. So what does this document have? And the link is there so you can review it. So include planning for library services that are relevant to non-English speaking background clients, organizational capacity, which includes your policies, the support from your CEO, from your library manager. If that support is not there, then it's quite tough to actually do your job. The quality of multicultural services that include collections, so an old collection and a dirty one doesn't do it. Promotion and delivery, because your client need to know that what resources do you have, and of course to distribute that information, that's why you need your network again, the evaluation. And we were asked to also talk about what are the challenges, what are the gaps. So These are the three things that I think are important and they are a challenge. The ongoing technology training in languages other than English, the language support availability, and information literacy, which is about critical thinking. So let's see. So we have the Tech Savvy Senior in this as well, a program that we coordinate here from the State Library, and we work with public libraries. And everything was going very well because mostly our target clients are seniors, 60 plus, with very low knowledge of technology. And then COVID came and decided to stay. So we have to shift very quickly into an online model. As we did that, and I would say quite successfully, but we left part of the population behind, because every person who needed a basic training face-to-face, we couldn't deliver. So going back into that point, but that was an issue. We deliver the Tech Savvy Senior YouTube online in 7 languages, smartphone, apps, and how to use Zoom. So also the latest report in terms of digital inclusion, it seems a little bit better. It seems like our inclusion is increasing in Australia, but the rate is really slow. The gap between digitally included and excluded of Australian is substantially widening. And some of the group are the low income and people over 65. And even when the infrastructure in Australia in terms of technology and internet, pretty much all Australians have access, but at least 2.5 million remain offline. And these are the people that come to the libraries to request help to fill out form because government is doing business online. Then we have multilingualism. Now, Professor Lobianco wrote the National Policy of Language in 1987, the first multilingual national language policy in any English-speaking country. I read the document. It was comprehensive, brilliant, but never fully implemented. So we have like a little touches of communicating in other languages or try to reach our communities. In Australia, the crucial role of languages in a multicultural society has not been recognized most of the time. So there are gaps there. We talk about inclusion and we recognize that we are multicultural, multilingual society. However, we behave like we are in a monolingual society, and this creates a whole range of issues. Just think about COVID and tell me if you went to a shopping center and saw in areas where there were like a high Vietnamese community, high Arabic community, if you saw any digital signage for COVID in your supermarket, in the shopping center, they were not there. And finally, we're gonna talk about critical thinking. Now, I came across Christopher, who worked for Liverpool City Library. He's a brilliant librarian, and he developed a program that he's delivered to high schools in Liverpool. And he talked about critical thinking, how to identify the 3 Ks for research information that is recent, relevant, and reliable. And that also is for our multicultural community who get the information from Facebook. So, hey, Trump said, drink bleach, but that doesn't work. So that's it. Ta-da!
Thank you, Oriana. That was great. So again, if you've got questions or comments for Oriana, please pop them in the chat and we'll come into them shortly. I'd like to introduce, is that right, Oriana? You're right? Yeah. I'd like to introduce now our 3rd panelist, Danny Liu, who's an associate professor in the DVC Education's portfolio at the University of Sydney. He's a molecular biologist by training, programmer by night, research and academic developer by day, and educator at heart. I like that, particularly that last one. He works at the confluence of educational technology, student engagement, learning analytics, and educational data science, pedagogical research, organisational leadership, and professional development. His work in educational innovation has been recognised through a number of national and international awards. So Danny's going to talk about learning analytics and what we can look for in data to support learning and support, information support for our users. Thanks, Danny. Over to you.
Great, thanks very much. Can you see my screen with the mind map on the screen?
Yes.
No, that's good, excellent, thank you.
Yeah.
And apologies for my voice. I normally don't sound this croaky, but I was at the Easter show yesterday and yelling at the kids, and so it's voice is croakier than usual. So thanks for your time today. I wanted to quickly chat about learning analytics and this strange field that's been kind of going on, bubbling in the background for about 10 years now, but hasn't really yielded any tangible outcomes for teachers or learners or anybody really. Don't let them hear that I say that. I told you that. But what I guess I wanted to share today is some ideas around what the learning analytics is, the challenges that we face globally as a field, and then how to connect this to the work that you all do as librarians and people who work in and around libraries. So I guess to start us off, I wanted to talk about, let me just move a few things around on my screen. I wanted to talk about what exactly is learning analytics, and the traditional definition that everyone uses is basically this one on the screen now. It's really around getting data in, collecting it, measuring it, analyzing, reporting it, and then using it presumably to understand and then also improve or optimize learning and the environments where learning occurs. And so there are a lot of different, I guess, purposes of learning analytics. And so one of the purposes of learning analytics is around understanding. And typically here, I'm just going to type as I speak, which could be a bit risky, is around understanding. And so typically here you have ideas around dashboards and those kind of things coming out. And so it's kind of ideas around your organization is sitting on data. Let's present the data or visualize it in a way which people can actually use to get a bit more understanding around what's happening. There's also a lot around prediction. And around prediction, it's kind of like the idea that because we have this data here, let's not just go about visualizing it, but also go around thinking about how we can predict how students or our learners are going to behave or how they're going to perform. And so it's kind of like the whole Amazon idea, you know, because you bought these two items, it means that you may be interested in this other item. Because you operated in the library in this particular way, or you did this thing in the classroom, this means that you could be doing this next thing. Other purposes around it could include things like personalized feedback and support. And so the idea is around finally involving the teacher or the educator in this process and actually thinking about how they use data to essentially personalize that resources and support and information that goes back to students. Now, in terms of data sources, learning analytics typically relies on a different range of things, mainly depending on what the institution or the organization has available to it. And so learning analytics traditionally has been very higher education focused. And so in the higher education field, you have things like something called the SIS, the Student Information System. You have things called the LMS, the Learning Management System. You have things like publisher platforms. You have things like other video platforms. You have student evaluation data. And now what people are starting to do more of is thinking about the kind of other interactions and touch points students have with the organization. And so a lot of people now are keying into key library data, for example. Creepily, some of them are starting to step into the realms of Wi-Fi data and the things that can tell us about students, and also social media data as well, and it gets kind of increasingly creepy as you go further down that list. And we can have a discussion about ethics soon as well. So with all these data sources, what people try to do in learning analytics is try to kind of put them into one data warehouse, so to speak, in order to try and understand and improve how learners learn. So across here on the right, we have ideas around basically challenges that we have going in learning analytics. And a lot of it is around the data is in lots of different places, and it's really hard to collect it in one place. And so silos of data, you may have library data sitting in one database, you have learning management system data sitting in a different place, you have Wi-Fi data sitting in a different database. And it's really hard to actually connect those ideas together. Educators at the coalface of teaching learners, they also have a lot of issues around actually getting access to the right infrastructure and the right tools in order to do this. Data is a very foreign concept to a lot of people, and using data in the right way is also quite tricky. There's also a lot of issues around bias and bucketing, and what I mean by this is learning analytics in the traditional sense tries to use algorithms to ostensibly understand students, but in order to do this, they have to make some assumptions about the data and the students and the learners underlying it. And so it's kind of like if you imagine Amazon's predictive shopping service. It's because you bought these two items, it means that you must be interested in the third, or because you viewed these items, it must be interested in this. But what those algorithms fail to do is they fail to truly understand you as the person, or the student or the learner as a person. And so there's a lot of algorithmic bias that creeps into these predictive algorithms, which is a bit of a problem. To do with this, also privacy and ethics, there's I guess a concept of beneficence in learning analytics, which basically says that just like in medical fields, we want to do no harm to our learners. And also we want to make sure that the data is captured in a way which is only used for the purposes which they've approved. And so there's a really big, I guess, ideas around privacy and ethics, which is really important. And finally, because of a lot of these things, because we can't get to the data, because we don't have the right tools for the data, because the data or the algorithms don't really do the right things for us, and because we have concerns about privacy and ethics around it, the uptake actually at the coalface with instructors has been really low over the past 10 years. And this is something that the learning analytics field is challenged by globally in terms of how do we actually get people to benefit from this? How do we get teachers and also students to benefit from this? So in terms of how we consider the connection between libraries and LA, these questions I want to just kind of hang here for a little bit, because we need to consider, in terms of your role as librarians, who are our learners and how do they seek success? What role do we all play then in achieving this success? And then how can we get data at the right times and right places about these interactions, which could then finally actually inform what we do to promote learning success a bit more. And so I think when we think about libraries and learning analytics, these are probably the key questions. It's thinking through how do we use data, or the right data, in the right way, and what would this data be in order to then improve the services and the education that we're rendering to our learners. Some of the opportunities I think that I see in terms of libraries and LA around these four things. And so we've heard today I was able to pop into a few things today about applied research, and so there's a lot of potential for working with other library stakeholders on applied research, and also this idea of using this to kind of prove or continue to prove our evidence of impact as libraries. And you'd be surprised, but there's actually a lot of untapped data sources that, at least in higher education, academics would like to get out of libraries and student interaction with libraries. And so there's a big opportunity here in terms of drawing from these untapped sources from the library. So with that, that's my 7 minutes up. So I'll hand back to Marianne.
Thanks so much, Danny. And thank you to all the panelists. I can see that we're already running quite a few questions in here. We'll give people time to think about Danny's presentation first, and I'll go back to the ones from, where are we? From Nathan. So Nathan, there's a question from Jelena. Do you think that having Indigenous academic officers and teachers increases the Indigenous students? I guess that means the numbers of Indigenous students.
Yeah, 100% do. And I've noticed in places, once they lose Indigenous staff, and I'm not just talking about, I think this is true in academia, but I also think it's true in libraries and museums. I think having Aboriginal staff does bring in Aboriginal community members. Recently, I got asked to help curate something at a venue out in Penrith, and they were asking because they were trying to engage different curators to get different community members to this venue, because they just don't get, they weren't getting many of their local Aboriginal population, but they also weren't getting many of their local, all these different sects. So they hired community members from those sects to bring them in. And I actually kind of turned them down, but I helped them find a curator from that local community, because I was saying, like, even myself, even as an Aboriginal person, going into that community, I'd be doing the same thing you'd be doing. If you at least get one of the local members, even if they haven't got curatorial experience, I can help them that bit. Their cousins will come, you know what I mean? And then, and that way the community gets introduced to the space. So you actually don't, so it definitely happens. More Aboriginal people in the space, more, when you see yourself in the space, it's easier to enter that stuff.